with therapy, it's just like, it's so nice to like talk to someone and for them to just understand you. It makes sense because this is who I am and it's just like part of who I am. That has been like really comforting because I'm finally understanding myself. Hi, my name is Bhaggya. I'm an early childhood educator and I've recently been diagnosed with ADHD, and this is my story. Before I got my diagnosis, I think I was always labeled as not listening, not being able to follow instructions, and I think even as a child as well, I've always been quite impulsive. Not being able to pay attention was one of my biggest things that like a lot of people that actually pointed out to me as well. I never felt like my brain and I were like one entity. I always felt like my brain controlled me, and even things that were outside of my control. So what led me to get a diagnosis, like my partner that I was with at the moment was living with a person who was diagnosed with ADHD. She told me that, oh, you sound a lot like her. And then so that sort of led me to look into ADHD, and then I started doing my own research. And then the more research I did, the more I just sort of thought like, oh, like everything is sort of starting to sound more like me. I wasn't really sure of like, going to see a doctor and like getting a diagnosis. And I think like eventually I thought like, it's worthwhile. So my process of getting a diagnosis was I went to see my regular GP. And I think like finding the right GP and finding the right psychologist is also important. When I got the diagnosis, I think I was just so relieved. It made sense of who I am and why I am the way I am. It was like, I think all my life I sort of felt like something was wrong with me because I wasn't like everybody else. And then having this diagnosis, just like everything was just like, oh, it's okay, it's just who I am. So some of the things that I understand now that I've been diagnosed with ADHD, I think one of the biggest things is like, why am I so late all the time? There's this concept called time blindness, where we don't realize how much time that even doing like a simple task would take. And it also made sense like why I wasn't able to follow a conversation, especially if there's like instructions. Part of me sort of like develop all these like tactics to sort of like pretend and like sort of blend in. If you have a conversation and if you're giving me instructions, I was so good at being like, yeah, of course I understand that, but my mind was like 100 miles away. When I'm about to do something, then I would realize, oh, I wasn't actually paying attention. People with ADHD is that we are quite interest driven. So if it's something that I love and if it's something that I'm really into, I could literally spend hours. So sometimes I like to do drawings. And if I get into the drawing and if it's something that I'm really interested in, like I want to finish it, I would spend hours, and I would sometimes even forget to eat and not realize how much time has passed or how much time I've actually spent on that task. But if it's just like mundane things, just like doing laundry, I cannot like get myself to do it. It's not rewarding for my brain. So it's just something that I would just put off. So after I received my diagnosis, one of the biggest things that I've been working with is I'm seeing a psychologist. For me, one of the biggest things is like the emotional dysregulation, which is also a part of ADHD as well. With therapy, it's just like, it's so nice to like talk to someone and for them to just understand you, and not being able to like trying to like explain yourself, because it's just like, oh, it makes sense because this is who I am and it's just like part of who I am. And that has been like really comforting because I'm finally understanding myself. With ADHD, what comes of it is like we feel so much emotions at the same time, and we can't really quite pinpoint like which emotion it is. And one of the things is like I'm trying to understand like, oh, it's okay to feel all of these emotions, and then sort of like learning to like take a step back. But it's not as easy as just like, taking a step back like this. It's still a learning process, and I'm still learning a lot of things about myself. I'm trying to be less harsh on myself. I'm sort of understanding like this is who I am, and I'm not trying to like hide part of myself. When we realize that we're not the same as other people, I think we go out of our way to blend in. And I think the biggest thing that I've started doing now is just sort of truly just being honest to myself. I think the reason that I didn't get any help soon, especially like I grew up in Sri Lanka for the first 12 years of my life, and like mental health is not something that people talk about in open, right? Even with kids, like if they have ADHD, like, or any sort of like mental disorder, they're immediately labeled as a difficult child, or often like if they're not doing good at school, they're just like, oh, they're just like a dumb person. Can't really blame my parents either, because they didn't know any better, because they also grew up in that culture. If you are hesitant to go seek help, it's easy for anybody to say like, oh, just go do it. But it takes a lot of courage for you to understand and accept that about yourself as well. I wanted to get a diagnosis was that I wanted to understand who I am. And getting a diagnosis is so important because it's important to understand that nothing's wrong with you. This is who you are as a person, and it's absolutely okay to be that person. And I think having that reassurance with the diagnosis was actually so important. I'm really glad.